Welcome, Natalie, to the Moms of Tweens and Teens podcast. I'm so happy to have you come on the show.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I love that you cover tweens and teens. It's my sweet spot. That's fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. Yes, I mean, tweens and teens, it starts in the tween years. That's why we're tweens and teens, because all these things start changing when they hit, depending upon how mature they are. Girls can hit tween at 9. I mean, everything starts changing.
I don't know if you've heard this phrase recently that's been developed in psychological circles that they're saying now that 19 to 24 is actually emerging adulthood. So when you and I were growing up, it was just teenagers, right? But now we have tweens, teens, and emerging adults. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, emerging adults.
Exactly. I don't know about you, but I was an adult when I was 21, but apparently you're not an adult anymore when you're 21. So
yeah, that could be a whole nother podcast.
Right, exactly. Let's just keep pushing it out. How about 52? How about 52?
We just don't want them to be being an emerging adult, still living in the basement, right?
That's exactly.
We want to try to get them out of the nest.
Exactly.
So I'm excited to share your book with the moms and caregivers that are listening. You just released your latest book called Simple Acts, A Busy Teen's Guide to Making a Difference.
Yes.
I love this book.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's got so many great ideas. Moms, you're just going to love to hear all the amazing ideas that Natalie has to share with us. But you wrote this during the pandemic, and I want you to tell a little backstory about how you got into philanthropy and helping teenagers and families to give and just give back and make a difference in their world, and also a little of your history and about writing the book.
Sure, absolutely. So my career was in healthcare. I have a master's in public health. I worked for hospitals and managed care companies, and I loved that work. But after my third child was born, I have 3 kids. They are 21, 19, and 14, almost 15. So I have 2 emerging adults and a teenager. After the third one was born, I ended up staying home with all 3 of them. And the work really grew out of my own personal experience as a parent. We live in New York City, which is a city of just tremendous wealth and tremendous need, very, very, wide variety of people, lots and lots of social service organizations. And I was a little frustrated as a parent of young children that there weren't a lot of organizations that would accept us as volunteers. And I think, all of your listeners will have had that experience, right? You want to go on Thanksgiving morning to a food pantry or a soup kitchen, and you're told that your children need to be 12 years old, 15 years old, 18 years old. So it is hard to find family-friendly volunteer opportunities, even here in New York. So I ended up partnering up with something called Doing Good Together. That's an organization in Minneapolis that is just a wonderful resource. Their mission is to help parents raise kids who care and contribute. It's just this beautiful, elegant mission statement. I reached out to the founder and she was delighted. She's like, oh my gosh, I've been looking for people like you across the country who can sort of pick up my mission and incorporate it in your community. So I curate a listing of family-friendly volunteer opportunities here in New York City, and I've been doing that for almost a decade. And that work, really, as a volunteer, I became the Rolodex, not to age myself, but I became the resource for our community of places to donate, places to volunteer, things to do with kids, events. And I really started to curate all of the family-friendly volunteer opportunities. And I realized pretty quickly that everyone wanted this information. They just didn't even know where to begin. And if we're being honest, they didn't want to take the time to figure it out. So as I start sharing my resources, as I start speaking to groups, synagogues, churches, Girl Scout troops, Brownie troops, you name it, bar and bat mitzvah kids, it occurs to me there's a book here. And I'm a writer. I've always enjoyed writing and various forms of communication. So I'm like, I think I could write something that would be useful. a prescriptive resource guide that's really actionable with lists and just ways for people to break it down, make it super simple, and incorporate it into really busy lives, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what this is about. This should not be another chore on your list of things to do. So my first book came out in 2019. I found a publisher that was excited about it. It was called Simple Acts: The Busy Family's Guide to Giving Back. And that just took off. I was on the Today Show, and I got to be on podcasts with wonderful people like you, and just really spreading this message. And again, it's not rocket science. Like, I didn't invent the wheel here, but sort of talking about ways to incorporate service into birthday parties and other family milestones and holiday traditions. And it's super simple. It's just being mindful and being intentional about it, and really just keeping it at the top of your mind as you move through your day. And it's the way that you role model your values for your children. It's living your values. And so immediately, the day that that book came out, I had people come over to me and say, "Oh, this is wonderful, but why don't you write one for teenagers? Because I have teenagers at home and they're the worst." And I'm like, I get it. I have teenagers, and I have teenagers at home. And it was the spring of 2019. I'm like, let me enjoy this moment, this book that I published, for a minute. And I for sure will write a teen book. I had to switch publishers because of, the nature of the publishing industry. And I signed a contract in the winter of 2019 into 2020. And so I signed a contract that asked me to write the book from March 1st of 2020 until June 1st of 2020. So we all know how that story ends. It was a fraught time in New York City, as it was everywhere. And I sort of, if I'm being honest, if you read the sort of prologue, the introduction to the book, I kind of lost heart a little bit. I wasn't sure if everyone cared. I didn't know if this work mattered. It felt like a very soft subject. I think you can agree that in March, in those very dark early days, I was like, I don't even know if this is important to do. And then it occurred to me, over weeks and months of being isolated with my family and figuring out what we could do to connect to other human beings, to help others. I started looking for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers always says, and I became re-inspired. And I realized that this work, this perspective, this stuff that I talk about and I love talking about with people like you, this is more important than ever. So figuring out a way to connect to other people, figuring out a way to improve the society that we live in, to help to make our world better and stronger, to be hopeful and optimistic. This work is more important than ever. So I finished the book. Fast forward, it takes a couple of years nowadays, supply chain, and this second book for teens came out in July. And this one is really written, as you will note, written for teens, to teens, and I tried really hard not to be preachy or naggy. I think we can all agree on this podcast that the last thing tweens and teens need is another adult telling them what to do and that they should care about other people. I wanted it to just lay out the facts of what service can do for you as a person and what you can gain from doing for others, because the giver gets as much as the receiver, sometimes more, and make it easy. Make it super, super easy for teens and tweens to embrace this work, but also to tap into their passions and the things that they're good at and their gifts and their strengths and how they can share those with the world and why they should care. And it came out in July, and here I am, and I'm just super excited to talk about it.
Oh, I was so inspired reading it. And I was telling you, you sent me like the PDF version.
Mm-hmm.
And I ordered a copy because I thought I have to get this because it was so inspiring. And what I was struck by in the foreword is how you talked about how we still are bombarded with the negative news.
Yeah.
And all the things that are going wrong. And it's easy to get sucked into that and feel despair.
Yep.
And I love the vision of we can make a difference.
Absolutely.
And getting outside of ourselves, we can sit, we can complain and focus on the negative, or we can go out there and make a difference.
Right.
And that you also say how we are more alike
Right.
and we are different.
Of course. Of course.
I'm like, yes, and how to bring unity, like getting all the benefits of just getting to know different people and stepping out and being able to serve people and see that our humanity that connects us all.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I absolutely agree with what you've said. If we all sit back and say, well, everything is terrible, there's nothing I can possibly do, well, then for sure, we're not going to be able to do anything, right? It's breaking it down into smaller pieces. There is something every single person can do. Every small action has an impact. Even the tiniest stone thrown into water makes a ripple, right? I mean, this is sort of obvious, but when you're feeling overwhelmed by the problems in the world, and this is my worry about the mental health of our tweens and teens right now, it feels very heavy. It feels very hopeless, and it feels very overwhelming. And I think that getting out of your own head, this is scientifically proven, that if you stop thinking about yourself and gazing at your own navel, and you start to look at your neighbor and how you might help someone else and make a connection with another human being, you will absolutely, I promise you, feel better about yourself and your problems, and you will feel more hopeful and more optimistic. Absolutely. And we saw that throughout the pandemic. And this is what I try to tell teens. Stop sitting and looking at your device and just scrolling, doom scrolling, as they say. If you look outside of yourself, keep eyes, ears, hearts, and minds open to the needs of others, it will make you a kinder, gentler, happier person. Your physical, mental, and emotional health will improve. I promise you, I guarantee it. And so I just feel like that's what the mission of the book is to help everybody see, as Arthur Ashe said, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. No one is expecting you to solve it, right? There's that expression from the Talmud, no one expects you to finish the work, but you still have to begin. You have to be engaged in it. And that's just what I hope that teens take from this, that they're inspired by it, to get out there and do something, anything.
Yeah. And I think that, as a mom myself, and for the listeners, we get bogged down. We're like,
Sure.
oh my gosh, my kid doesn't want to do anything. They only want to be on their phone. They're not motivated. I try to get them to do something
Right.
and help out, but they don't want to do it. Or I'll just have them do it because it looks good on the couch.
Yeah.
We have that too, which isn't a bad thing.
No, I'm trying, right. I'm
Yeah.
not going to be cynical about that. Like, I know, I'm being honest. If, I know that people might be purchasing my book because they're thinking, oh, my kid really hasn't engaged in a lot of service, especially over the pandemic for obvious reasons. And this is important. This is something that you want to show: scholarship applications, college applications, job interviews. But I would like to flip the narrative on that. I think that this work provides kids, teens, and tweens an opportunity to, again, have their minds expanded, to see the world through the eyes and the experience of others, and it gives them stories to tell. It connects them to the lived experience of other people. And so if you're being asked to write an essay about who you are fundamentally, so you're sharing with a college or with a job or with a grant, whatever it is, who you are, telling a story about something that you've learned, a value that you've gained through service, is meaningful. Not just, I volunteered, for 3 weeks at the food pantry. No, you're not saying it that way. You're talking about the experience of doing that, what you learned, what you gained, and more importantly, the human interaction, the connections that you made to other people, and perhaps the stories that you've listened to and incorporated into your understanding of the world. So yeah, I like to say, don't count the hours, make the hours count, right? Because all of our kids, many schools make teenagers do service to check a box so they can graduate. Okay, that might be a requirement, and that's okay. Let's flip the narrative on that. And I address that straight on in the book for kids. And I say, instead of complaining about that, let's look at it as an opportunity to figure out what you're passionate about, what your gifts, talents, and skills are, what you're good at. the issues that you care about out in the community, and then how can we marry those two things and find organizations that would benefit from your help. And I guarantee you, as a parent, you said, everyone's like feeling like this is just a burden, another thing on their plate. If you find something that lights your kid up, when they walk out of there, they are lit up with excitement about how much fun they had, or how meaningful it was, or the impact they felt like they made, or the connections they made, they will want to go back. And it's even better if they do it with other kids, the social interaction of doing it with other people and bringing friends along as well. So that's really the goal here. That's the whole key of, of the assessment at the front of the book. What are you good at? What are your talents? What are the issues you care about? What are you angry about? What are you worried about? Now, how can we combine those two things? And then how can you go out into the world and help fix it?
Yeah, I love that part in the book. Moms, there's a self-assessment. And I think that is very powerful, because this is helping our kids to learn about themselves in the process.
Yes.
Like, what do I love to do? What am I passionate about? How am I wired? I mean, there was a part in there where you talked about, am I shy?
Right.
Like, how do I take in criticism or feedback? I mean, and helping them to become more self-aware of themselves and then what they love to do. Because I do find that as parents, it's easy to focus on the things our kids aren't doing, right, or the things they are doing that are irritating, or their math grade and getting the math grade up.
Right.
Versus like, what lights you up, like you said, and helping them to get in touch with that, to get outside of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And be able to feel that power of, that positive, power they have inside of themselves, that I can help to influence change.
Yeah, absolutely. And the surest way to ensure that a kid is going to want to continue to do this work is to find work that they enjoy and that they connect to and that resonates for them and that taps into their interests and their passions and something that they enjoy doing and something they're interested in. As you know this about having them do their schoolwork, right? It's much more, if they're a great reader and they don't like math, they're going to want to read for English class. They're not going to want to do their math. So it's the same perspective on if your kid is into sports, I promise you there is a way that child can go out into the community and use their love of sports, their passion for whatever game it is that they like to play, and share it with others in a meaningful way. And that's why, it's a little side thing that I do where people call me or email me and they say, I have a child. I just got a call the other day from my dad, who is a 6th grader who plays squash, loves squash. Okay, the game of squash. I don't know anything about this game. How can he give back to the community with the game of squash? Okay, let me think. Well, I bet the equipment is very expensive. What if he started a drive at where he plays to gather the equipment, so that when people want to donate that, if it's gently used, then maybe he sets up a program in a local school after school to teach kids how to play squash. Maybe he can ask where he plays if they'll donate some time in the courts there or whatever. He could do a fundraiser playing squash. Like, there are ways. So he can take his passion for squash and he can substantively give back in his community, probably to other kids like himself, right? The easiest way to get a kid to want to go out and volunteer with other little kids, and they love to play basketball, is tell them they can teach kids how to play basketball, right? I mean, dance, music, if someone's a great reader, if they love to draw, if they're a knitter, if they're a baker, every single thing that kids love to do in their free time, all of those things can be translated into a way to give back in the community. And those are the types of ideas that I list out in the books. And again, I didn't invent this, you're baking cookies already. Maybe you bake some extra and you wrap them up and you take them to the local senior center or the fire department or the police station, like with a note or something. Like, this is just sort of thinking about ways to organically, seamlessly, and mindfully incorporate this work into your daily lives. And I think when you set it up that way for kids and teens, it doesn't feel as daunting. It doesn't feel like, oh, I got to get my paper. Here, sign my paper. They always have the paper from school. I need the hours, sign my paper. We need to get rid of that narrative. This needs to be like what brings them joy, what lights them up, and then help them find a way to do that. And I promise you, they'll have more than the 50 hours or whatever number of hours they need to graduate.
Yeah. What do you think? I'm sitting here thinking like, I know for my kids, I would feel we did different things like, the Christmas child, that our
Mhm.
church actually did where you bought. I mean, that was a highlight. We would go and we'd buy toothbrushes and
Right.
toothpaste and I can't remember Christmas project, Christmas child, something like that.
Right.
And we did different things, but I remember feeling overwhelmed by it and like, oh, it's just one more thing I have to do. But I was struck by, even in the book during the pandemic, you thought of like, okay, let's order a pizza for who did you order it for? I can't
So
remember.
we have a good friend who's a chief of an emergency room. So that's a really tough job that she was doing during a very difficult time here in New York City. And so I heard about that there was a train, a food train, got set up such that because people were working crazy hours, right? I mean, it wasn't a normal shift situation. So the food, so we would literally just sign up to send pizzas to the emergency room where our friend was the chief of medicine. But again, like these are like such little things. My daughter is a knitter. She would be like knitting scarves and hats, and we were giving them to a senior center or whatever. My other daughter made fleece blankets because we have all this leftover fleece for some reason, where you cut, you've seen this, it's like a square and you cut little strips and then you knot them, and we delivered them to the ASPCA, to the shelter. Of course, at that point there were no dogs in the shelter because everybody went to take the dogs home. But these were just things to keep hands busy and to keep us from dying of boredom, right? There's only so many movies you can watch and breads you can bake. But we would just find these little things that we could do in the community to just show our love and support and gratitude for the first responders, for the folks who are delivering the food. I mean, if you couldn't find a way to give back in the pandemic, even remotely, even from sadly from our homes, even just connecting with people via Zoom or writing letters to isolated elders. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that you could do, but you had to wake up in the morning and say, okay, what is my purpose today? Right? This is what we're all looking for. I got to get out of bed and put one foot in front of the other. And things are looking pretty bleak in March, April, May, June of 2020. Well, what can we do to make ourselves feel a little bit better? And in those instances, it was, baking or sending the pizzas or doing knitting or doing whatever the thing was. It just got us through. And so I agree with you, back to your original point. Sometimes it's overwhelming, particularly at the holidays. I mean, if you're talking about Christmas child or the cookie swap or the whatever, I think if you try and pull this back to its basics, what is the holiday season about? De-stress that, try and engage your kids in a conversation around, what is this, not just what are we going to get, but what are we going to give? And how can we make the holidays brighter for other people? And just don't stress yourself out. Like I've got to check the box of the charitable giving, but a way to sort of seamlessly incorporate this into the shopping that you're already doing, the baking that you're already doing, whatever it is, and really give your kids the opportunity to see you thinking about this and to engage them in it. This is super important, right? All of this work, going out and working in the community, doing this work at home, give your kids agency, let them have input into what it is that you're doing, who it's benefiting. And, if you go out and do something in the community, let's say on Thanksgiving, talk about it afterwards, right? Have a conversation. What did you love about that? What made you feel uncomfortable? Did you enjoy that kind of work? Do you want to go back there to the food pantry in the new year, or should we continue to work there? Is there something else that you'd like to do? What are the issues? What are the social justice issues that you care about? Is hunger not one of the things that you're really super passionate about? You'd rather think about something else? Like, give them the opportunity to have some input. And it's just going to feel like less of a chore and more of a joy, I think.
Yeah, asking them the question. I
Right.
love that. Like, okay, what could we do if we're baking these cookies, baking these, who might we give some extra cookies to?
Right. It's not a yes or no. It's not like, should we do this? No, we're doing this, but we're gonna, I get this question all the time from parents of teens, especially tweens and teens, like, how do you get your kid to want to do this? Or how do you get your kid? Well,
Yes, yeah.
first of all, like we make our kids do lots of things, like get up in the morning, brush their teeth, do their homework, go to school, like do their chores. Like this is a part of what we are teaching them. This is how we live. This is how our family engages with the world. So we are going to do some
I
service.
love that. Oh,
we're going to do some service this weekend. We're doing some service this weekend, or we have this opportunity to do some service. What would you like to do? This or that? It's just like when they were little, these are the two outfits. Do you want this one or that one? It's not like letting them go in the closet and pick anything they want, right? It's this, we're doing it. But let me hear what you think. Like, what's your input? What interests you about this? What we're going to engage in this weekend, and then talk about it afterwards, and really give them, allow them to give some feedback. If something makes a kid very uncomfortable, maybe interacting with the elderly is not their thing, right? That takes a certain kind of temperament. Okay, that's fine. We don't have to do that, but let's think about something else that we can do. This isn't a choice of doing it or not doing it. We're doing it, right? We make lots of time. Let's all be very honest here as parents of tweens and teens. We prioritize and make lots of time for lots of things, lots of soccer, lots of hockey, lots of dance, lots of tutoring. We can prioritize this. And by doing so, we are living our values and showing our kids what's really important to our family.
Oh gosh, that's so good. I'm thinking, yeah, this is not just, but this is a value. This is a part of our lives that we give back.
That's right. This is just who we are as a family. This is how
we are as a family.
At the end of the day, how do you want your family to be remembered? How do you want your children to remember the things that you all did as a family? I promise you, they're not going to remember the Lego set that they got for Christmas. Promise you, or the Barbie doll, or really even the trip to Disney. That was like, you saved and planned and made yourself crazy. They're not going to remember that. They're going to remember going to the soup kitchen every Thanksgiving morning and serving a Thanksgiving meal to others who are less fortunate, and then going home and enjoying Thanksgiving together, and being grateful for that, and having empathy for people who don't have a place to have Thanksgiving, and that you provided that for them. And if you do that every year, that's creating a habit of service, right? These traditions around holidays, around birthdays, you do this consistently year after year, that becomes their experience. Those are the memories they're going to have into adulthood and when they raise their own families, because that's the end game, right? They're not going to remember that soccer tournament.
Oh yeah. Well, and stuff just wears out, and then we want the next thing.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet giving back, that is so life-giving.
Right.
Talk about the research.
Mm-hmm.
What is the research showing the difference that it's making in teens' lives? Because you just started a podcast.
Yep.
Interviewing with teens on your show.
Yep. Just teenagers, very short and sweet. These are teen change makers, I call them. They are fundraisers, nonprofit founders, volunteers, social activists, social entrepreneurs, and they get all lit up. I just want to hear them tell their story. What inspired them to start this activity, whatever it is. What have they done? How many people have they helped? What are their plans for the future? What challenges did they face? What did they learn? And kids just get lit up telling me these stories. And it's incredible. It's 15 minutes or 18 minutes. And I leave those conversations so inspired. And so I hope others will listen and be inspired as well. But the research is super clear on this. And there are longitudinal studies. There was one out of Harvard called Making Caring Common. That was like a 20-year, 25-year longitudinal study. It is undisputed, scientifically proven that volunteering, doing for others, makes you feel better. You are less depressed, less lonely, more connected. Volunteers live longer. There is a direct correlation to longevity Okay. Teens who volunteer are less likely to engage in risky behaviors, and those can be defined as early sexual behavior, drug and alcohol use, less likely to drop out of school. Teens who volunteer, and again, this is, I have a public health background, so, and this does not, you might say, oh, well, it's skewed because it's only well-off kids that do this. Nope, even if you take that out of the picture, socioeconomic status out of the picture, even amongst teens who are at risk, considered at risk themselves, volunteering has all of these benefits. Less likely to engage in risky behaviors, more likely to stay in school, more likely to do better academically. I'm sorry, but right off the bat, I'm pretty sure those are things that your audience cares about pretty deeply, okay? So right there, you don't need to hear any more. Volunteering absolutely makes you feel better and makes you do better in the world. Teens who volunteer with their families, children and teens who volunteer with their family unit are much more likely to do so as adults with their own families. Teens who volunteer with friends, there's sort of this positive peer pressure, if you will. They are more likely to continue to want to volunteer because it's a social activity now. This is all the stuff that we've been talking about, right? By every measure, volunteering is good for your mental, physical, and emotional health. I don't know why we wouldn't give this to our kids.
Yeah, it gives their lives purpose and meaning.
Absolutely.
And
1,000%.
we all long to matter and bring value and make an impact, versus so much of the world now is it's external, all the social media. It's like, doesn't fill you up.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's this feeling of a helper's high, that has been scientifically proven. It's sort of an endorphin rush that comes to the brain. It is this physiologically good feeling that washes over you. Everyone can relate to this. You do something nice for another person, you help someone, and they express gratitude towards you, or they smile at you. And even if they don't, if you know that you substantively helped someone else, you changed the course of their day, you get a jolt of a good feeling, of an endorphin rush. It's just like a runner's high, as they say. Why would you not want that? That feels like a really healthy drug to me. That's a drug that you want your teens to have. And the more you do it, this is why the longevity piece comes in, right? People who consistently volunteer for years and years and years, they live longer. They feel better. They're less lonely, less isolated. We are such a there's an epidemic of loneliness. I actually heard Dr. Ruth Westheimer speak before the pandemic. God bless her. She's still alive. She's in her 90s. And she said her next book, she wrote all these seminal books about sexuality. Her next book is about the epidemic of loneliness and how we are a society that feels so connected because we have these devices in our hands that make us feel like we're so connected. And yet we are so disconnected from one another, really meaningfully.
Yes.
And back to what I said earlier, that this is the number one best way to connect to other people, is to get out there and get proximate with the folks that you're helping and be in the community and learn about the issues and feel really good about helping somebody else get through the day and maybe lighten their burden just a little bit. So, the science is super clear. I shouldn't need to convince anybody that this is a good idea, but it seems like sometimes like, oh, it's a nice thing, or it's just it's going to be the last thing on your kids' list of activities on their college applications. No, I disagree. I think that this is really one of the most important activities that our kids can engage in. And, that these are the stories that they will want to tell in a college interview or something. That it's not about the touchdown that they scored or the medal that they earned. It will be about this, and because that gets to the heart of who they are as a human being and what they will bring to a workplace, to a college campus, etc.
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's just beautiful. Natalie, tell our listeners how they can get your book, and actually where their kids, how can they use it to help their kids to become, where they want to give back.
Sure.
Because I know how my audience thinks. And they're kind of like, well, I don't know how this is going to work.
Right.
But I think your book is just a great resource, instrument. I don't know what to call it, but to get your kid tapped into what they can do
Right.
that's going to light them up.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I think, I don't think forcing is a good thing, right? So, buying it, having it on the table, having it on the coffee table. I've had friends tell me they just sort of leave it out and then the kid picks it up and flips through it. It's not meant to be read start to finish, page 1 to page 150 or whatever it is. Each chapter is its own sort of topic, right? So there's a chapter on social entrepreneurship. If that's something that they're sort of curious about, how do you start a company that has some element of social good incorporated into it? How are they sort of informed consumers about that, right? If you're in the Starbucks and you see that there are 2 bottles of water, would you think about, make the choice to choose the bottle of water that gives back to the community in some substantive way? There are companies that have this as foundational to their mission. And so really teaching these kids that they have this consumer power. So maybe you have a conversation about that when you're out in the store and they're like, oh, there's a chapter about that in Natalie's book. But, as you mentioned about the self-assessment, I just think that's a really wonderful tool if your kid is open to it. I think starting off with that, again, you're not forcing them to read it right now and figure out what you're going to do, and you have to volunteer in the community. But it could be a situation where you say, we as a family, I think we're going to make a commitment in this new year, or whatever it is, or as you begin high school, or as you begin your senior year, whatever it is, we're going to make a commitment to try and do a little bit more service in the community. So, but I need your help. I need you to help me figure out what that looks like for our family, both in terms of fitting it into our schedule and what is really going to resonate for all of us, what's going to light us all up, what's going to make us have fun and enjoy the time. So I'd really love to hear what you think. If you go through this assessment, what are the things that you want to share? What are your gifts and skills and strengths? What do you like to do? And then I'm curious, like, what are the issues that you care about in the community, in the world abroad, at large? And then let's think together. Let's sit down together at the computer. And of course, I have a lot of resources in the book, but I often refer and I say, okay, now you're going to Google that together and you're going to do a little research. What are the organizations in your community that are affecting change in that area? And then, of course, the book will have national organizations and international organizations that you can tap into. So I think you just use it as a conversational tool, like a conversation starter. And then, of course, if your child comes home and says, I have been told that I have to finish 40 hours before in order to graduate, what am I going to do? You're going to say, I happen to have this book, and it might sort of spark something for you. That's what it's about. It's sort of lighting the flame, just igniting this little flame that they might have an idea, or they have a club that needs to do a fundraiser. There's a whole chapter where I just list out tons and tons of fundraiser ideas. This is not rocket science. I didn't come up with the car wash, okay? But I talk about different ideas and different options, and maybe you could think about this, and maybe you could think about that. But so they come home and they say, my Model UN club needs to raise money, so we're just going to sell candy bars. Maybe we could think of something else. So let's look at the fundraising chapter in Natalie's book. Maybe there's another idea in here of a fun, different kind of fundraiser that you can ask the school if you guys can do that. I just think kids have limitless energy. And if you just kind of steer them in the direction and share this as a potential source of ideas and not be like, here, read this right now, we have to do service, it will help them. Inevitably, something in here will spark something for them. And then from there, they fly from there on their own.
Yeah, I love how you have all the ideas at the end of the book. How many are there? I had it written down.
I don't know. My publisher did the cross-referencing and the indexing, and I was like, wow, I'm glad I didn't have that job.
Yeah, 52. There was 52 intentional ways to spread kindness in your life.
Sure. And that's just, I do one a week or whatever. But listen, I like to say there are no such things as random acts of kindness. I know that's a big phrase. I don't think anything's random. I think everything's intentional, right? If you walk through a door, you're walking through a doorway and you let the door slam in the face of the person behind you, that was an absent-minded thing. But intentionally holding the door for the person behind you, that's not a random act of kindness. That's intentional. That is walking through your days with your eyes open to the needs of others. And that's all it is. So, but again, this is stuff that I hope people start to do with their kids in their own homes and as they move through the world. But yeah, I hope it is something that can be used as part of these conversations that you're already having with your kids. And I promise you, they're going to come home from school one day and say, I need to do hours. I want to do hours. My friend is doing this thing that I want to do. And there's the entry. There's the opening for you to start that conversation.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's such a great gift now that, I mean, Thanksgiving will be upon us for those that are in the US. The holidays are coming upon us. It's such a great book. The websites you have in there, all the resources to be able to say, hey, let's pick one,
Right.
you know, here's a bunch of ideas.
That's right. It's not a matter of whether we're going to do it. But you get to choose which one we do. Right.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah. We don't even give it an option. We're going to do something. So pick it.
Pick something that you're going to enjoy doing, and then we'll have a good time.
And you have very small ideas too, like you said, opening up the door.
Right.
I mean, it's like a snowball effect. You know, if we start thinking like that, if we're looking for it intentionally.
Well, you know, it's this whole pay it forward idea. You know, so much of this goes around social media. So this is not like rocket science to these kids, but you know, you pay for the toll for the person behind you on the highway, right? It like makes their day, or you know, put some change in, or pay for the coffee of the person behind you in the coffee shop, or you know, I just think kids need to see you doing those things, and then they'll pick up on it, and then they'll do it, and then that will like change their whole lives. You know, I'll just finish by telling you a story of a friend whose son is in college in New Jersey. And he called her in the middle of the night. And so that's always a good one, right? we love getting that phone call. That's great.
Yeah, it's so scary.
Oh my God, John, what happened? Where are you? Are you in jail? What happened? He said that he was out at a bar. He is legal. He was out at a bar with friends, and they were walking home, and they ran into a man on a bridge, like kind of on a footbridge, who looked really upset and sad. And they went over and they sat with him a bit, and they chatted with him. And he said to them something like, I was thinking about taking my own life tonight, but you guys stopping and seeing me and spending time talking with me and learning, you know, asking me what's up, whatever, has really given me, you know, some hope. And I'm gonna go back home and think about it, be with my family. And he was crying. He called his mother. He was sobbing. And it just kind of raises this issue that every single person wants to be seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Seen and heard and understood. And many people right now, I think, are suffering and feeling very lonely. And if your kid can have that experience of really seeing another person and their experience and what their lived experience is like, how they look at the world, and how they, you know, what's going on for them in the world. If they can see that and incorporate it into their experience and know that they made a tiny bit of a difference for that person, I just think they'll be bit by the bug of this. It will occur to them how important this work is.
Oh, absolutely. What a beautiful story. They came just at the right time and took the time.
That's right.
To talk to this man.
Right.
And what a difference those little acts of kindness. We never know, do we?
That's right. You don't know, right? It was that expression, you know, be kind always, because you don't know the burden that the other person is carrying. That's true for every single human being that you interact with every single day. So your smile, you holding the door, you starting a chat, you know, saying good morning, you know, you just don't know how your actions are going to impact the other person's life, and it could change their day, their week, their year, their life. And again, it's very simple, small things, right? He just spoke to him. He didn't give him money. He didn't give him a ride. Like, very simple, very simple acts. That's it. there we are.
That's the kindness. Yeah. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for the difference that you're making in so many lives, and just spreading the kindness and this message, and helping us to be more intentional and think about these things and how we can model it for our kids, and, you know, giving them the book and looking at ourselves, taking the assessment ourselves, right? We can take it ourselves and learn about ourselves and say, hey, this was kind of interesting.
I had someone ask me recently, well, what's your next book going to be? I said, oh, I don't know. And they said, why don't you write one for adults? I said, oh my goodness. I would think that adults would know how to do this by now. They're like, well, you'd be surprised, maybe that's a whole other thing. But if these conversations that we're having inspire adults to think differently about the way that they move through the world, and how they might want to use some of their free time to give back to others, especially if you're not feeling great, if you're feeling sort of hopeless and sad. I promise you, one day volunteering out in the community with other folks really gets your mind off your own problems. It makes a big difference, and I think you'll get bit by the bug as well.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I like that. We'll have you back on after you write that book.
Right, exactly. It's not moms of tweens and teens, it's just for moms. That's it.
Yeah, yes. So tell everybody where to find your book, where to find you.
Sure. Yeah. So my website is simpleactsguide.com, and there's links there to both books and other things that I've written, and my podcast. And on social media, I'm at Simple Acts Guide.
Wonderful. And can they find you? You're on Instagram too.
That's the Instagram. Yeah, that's
Okay.
Instagram.
And is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I thought, yeah, you were talking about the website. So wonderful. Yeah, this has been great. So thank you for coming on the show, and I'll share all those links as well in the write-up for everything. So
awesome. Thanks so much, Cheryl. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.